Hey guys, welcome back. So now we are getting into part 1 of Cheer, which is like one of your many mini stories within Batman Urban Legends, to where within Urban Legends it gives you like 4 different mini stories which go on to get into Harley Quinn, Lucius Fox, and Grifter, but for this one I just wanted to get into Batman and Red Hood, and mainly because this 6-part story Cheers, it gives us a bit more information on Red Hood, which takes place before our Red Hood talks in Future State. So let's get into it, but first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so first, to give a bit of context to this, I want to first go back to Infinite Frontier Joker issue 1 and also Infinite Frontier issue 0. But starting with Joker issue 1, if you guys remember, towards the beginning of that issue, we had got the rundown of what had happened during A-Day, to where it was reported that close to midnight, a number of gas bombs went off, releasing a highly lethal dosage of a modified version of the Joker toxin. But then on top of that, if we go over to Infinite Frontier issue 0, to where in that issue we got a number of starter narratives. And amongst those stories, we got a closer look into what Jim Gordon was talking about when he had mentioned the heroic efforts of the security guard Sean Mahoney, who had discovered this attack at Arkham around 11:53 p.m, which is also when at the time he had identified Bane's body, and not long after, with catching more of the bombs that were going off, it was reported that he had attempted to burn some of the toxin out of the air in order to save some of the staff who weren't infected yet, but with doing so, this fire had also caused an explosion that almost took his life, leaving him heavily injured just as Batman showed up. But with doing this, Mahoney was able to save some of the staff, and then afterwards when Batman had arrived, Batman had went in and saved the other 17, and after that he had helped clear this modified version of the Joker toxin from the air so that then it was safe for the authorities and everyone else to go inside. But then on top of this, you also have the situation that Jim Gordon was talking about in relation to Mayor Nakano being the active commissioner at this time. And with Mayor Nakano starting his new structure, he had also attempted to enforce this no mask law, which really didn't make much of any sense as far as the police being more worried about that when Batman showed up. But then we would also come to find out that there was a bit more to it as far as someone pulling strings, to where in that case we see more of those details in Batman issue 106. Because throughout the issues of Batman, which carried the narrative like in a more linear fashion, like out of Joker War going into Infinite Frontier, it's here where we see the return of Simon Saint, the founder of Saint Industries, who had left Gotham some time ago in order to build his company in the heart of Silicon Valley. But then also upon his return post Joker War, he had then proposed the idea of the magistrate program to Mayor Nakano. And with doing so, like very much leaning into Nakano's history of working for the GCPD, but then also selling to him the idea that Gotham needs more than what the GCPD can provide, given the fact that prior to this point that they haven't been able to do their job successfully without the assistance of masked vigilantes. But then on top of that, even with the help of the vigilantes, Gotham has since spun out of control, but with the vision of Simon Saint, the GCPD could focus on petty crimes and leave the heavy hitters to the magistrate and the peacekeepers within. But then on top of this, when we go back to Infinite Frontier issue 0, it's here where we see a much closer look at what Simon Saint is up to. And though it's not fully laid out for us like all the facts and like everything that he's done, but it is here where we find out that he has been manipulating events in Gotham in order to secure his sales pitch to Mayor Nakano to more or less guarantee that his magistrate program will stick. And this we know when we see him ask Scarecrow if he believes that the people are scared enough to accept the magistrate program. And this alone is a pretty big twist, because for one, when we heard the information from Jim Gordon within the new Joker series, as far as what the police know, Jonathan Crane, the Scarecrow, is presumed to be dead. And with us seeing him work with Simon Saint, it now begs the question of the two of them orchestrating A-Day. But then also, like, if that is the case, then it's also likely that Simon Saint is one of the mysterious rich friends who had sent Cressida to ask Jim Gordon to head down to Belize and kill the Joker. And like on top of that, with Scarecrow still alive, even after it appeared that we had seen him in his cell, back when we seen Sean Mahoney making his way to Bane, who was codenamed John Doe, but with us knowing that Scarecrow's still alive, this also has me believing you guys' theories of Bane being alive here, working as Cressida's muscle, while cosplaying as Nemesis in the meantime. And last but not least, with us knowing more about A-Day and Simon Saint's involvement, it now seems even less likely that the Joker is actually involved, and it seems more like Jim Gordon's getting set up to be the next Danny Ryan, which is crazy. But we'll see more of how that unfolds throughout the Infinite Frontiers Joker series, which is already one of my favorite stories, starting off within Infinite Frontiers so far. But with going over these events that more or less describe the changes in Gotham since Joker War, I really just wanted to point some of these things out because there's quite a bit of information from a number of different issues that make their way back into this 6-part story. But then it's here where we jump into Batman Urban Legends, where we get into part 1 of 6 of Cheer. And when we jump in, we start off with Jason Todd, who's chasing down this dude in Gotham who's been getting his hands on this new drug called Cheer Drops. And one of the first things that we pick up with Jason while he's chasing this dude down is that he's come to the decision of making one compromise while working in Gotham and chasing down this drug. And that one compromise while he's here is that he'll only use rubber bullets, which is why when he chases this guy down, he more or less tells him like he can do this all night. But like with seeing this, it immediately makes me think of the new like Gotham Knights game that's coming, and more or less the explanation to why Jason Todd uses rubber bullets. Because for Jason, like even with chasing this guy down, he also thinks over like the whole ideal of the fear tactics and how that's usually Bruce's thing. But for Jason, like even when he was Robin, like the more direct approach was always his thing. But with him making this adjustment and investigating this new drug, Cheer Drops, he at least gets the guy to tell him where he got him from, which from this point leads Jason to go check out an apartment over at 7th and Orchard. But with him making his way over there, he hears a couple of officers responding to some gunshots, but the officers really don't check it out because one of them says that it's probably some gang members teaching the younger kids how to shoot, and in response, like the other officer who hears this, he's like, man, like kids should just be allowed to be kids. And with Jason overhearing this, like just before he leaves, it also reminds him of his younger years, like when Bruce had just taken him in. Because for Jason, he's pretty much had that type of childhood to where he was never really allowed to be a kid. Because in his case, before Bruce adopted him and took him in, Jason had to turn to crime just to survive on the streets. And even when you put that on top of his history, like with his biological mother, Sheila Haywood, who was supposed to be a secret and had to give him up to his father, Willis Todd, who was a criminal that was working for Two-Face, but with that early version of a family being ended, with Willis's wife overdosing and Willis being murdered, it really sent Jason on a path for survival at a super young age. But at this point, like with Jason thinking back on his younger years, like at the time when Bruce had taken him in, and if you guys remember, like I feel like we talked about it not too long ago, but like when Bruce had first taken in Jason, he was very hard on him with the training, and very often Jason would express his frustration, which is more or less the moment that we run into here. But during this time when Jason, he got tired of practicing throwing batarangs, but when this happened, he was in the Batcave and he stumbled across Bruce's armory, which initially confused him because he thought Bruce hated guns, and he wasn't wrong, but Bruce had also explained to Jason that he still had to know everything about guns because as a detective, he had to master everything, even the things that he hates. And this is a memory that comes back to Jason as more or less part of his version of a childhood memory. But after this, we then jump over to Bruce in present day, who's also investigating this whole Cheer Drop drug that just hit the streets, which around this time is being distributed for a couple weeks now. And one of the crazy effects that this drug has, which is more or less where it gets its name, is that it gives its users like a sense of euphoria. And it'll cause these people who take it to have these very pleasant hallucinations, much like this guy that Bruce finds standing on the ledge of a rooftop who believes his dad's about to take him on a roller coaster. But fortunately, like when this dude jumps, Bruce is able to save him and turn him over to the authorities so he can get some help. But then in addition to saving this guy's life, like Batman also picks his pocket, and with doing so, possibly even saving this dude from a possession charge. But with doing this, Bruce got his hands on some Cheer Drops, so at least this way he can examine them so that he can have a better idea on who's making them and continue his investigation from there. But right after this, we then go over to Jason, who's made his way to the location that he got from his lead, which led him to this rundown apartment. And when he gets there, he shakes up this Jay in the hallway and he asks him like who around there is selling Cheer Drops, which is what then leads Jason to the 3rd floor. And when Jason goes up there, he hears like a soft sniffle like someone crying, and he also sees a door open. And when he goes in, he sees this little redhead kid who freaks out when he sees Jason, but Jason calms him down when he lets him know that he's here to help. But also when Jason gets here, like the kid tells him that something's wrong with his mother, like she was laughing, she was happy, but now she's just laying there, and Jason checks her out only to find out that she's in a drug-induced coma. But for Jason, this also hits home in a very emotional way because he had lost his mother of a drug overdose. And on top of that, there's kind of the coincidence of like your younger Jason Todd originally having red hair and this kid having red hair, which also make it really feel like a reflection of Jason in a way. But with him finding this kid here and talking to him and getting more information, the kid tells him that his name is Tyler, and with Jason trying to find out if Tyler has someone who can look after him, or perhaps if there's a father in the picture, Tyler then tells him yes, and that his dad's name's Andy, which Jason is mainly concerned about because he'd rather find this kid's dad than have a situation to where the kid's just thrown into the system. And when this happens, he then calls Barbara, who initially is just surprised to hear him, and her response at first is kind of like, okay Jason, like what are you doing? But then when he gives her the details of him finding this kid, and he asks Barbara to track Andy's phone number so that Jason can find Tyler's dad, Barbara then immediately gets it and she helps him out. But when she then asks Jason like if he wants her to call the authorities or someone to come get the kid, Jason then says no because he wants to keep Tyler close so he can keep him safe. But also at this time we go over to Bruce, who's been able to examine the teardrops, and with doing so he's come to discover that they've been made from a modified version of the fear toxin. But in the case of teardrops, they take the effect of the fear toxin and they give the user an opposite reaction, which is what causes the euphoria and the pleasant hallucinations. But with the base of this drug being heavily modeled after the Scarecrow's formula, Bruce then has his suspicions that is tied to Dr. Jonathan Crane, who once again at this point is supposed to be dead. But even with that being the case, he still reaches out to Barbara and he asked her to look into the possibility of anyone who worked for Scarecrow possibly using Crane's research and creating this drug. But when he reaches out to Barbara, like he just asks her to look into Crane's associates, and she looks into it but nobody's really active, which then means that Scarecrow's either really dead or just off the grid. But then when Barbara asks Bruce like, why is he asking about Scarecrow? It's then when Bruce tells her that he's investigating the teardrops. And it's then when Barbara gets quiet for a minute and then she's like, alright, Jason called, man, he's investigating too. And from there, like Barbara tries to explain, but Bruce is just like, he's a killer, I'll do this alone. And after that, he just hangs up. Stand up in the motor, push the dashboard. Or whatever Future said. But at this point, Bruce has decided that he's gonna do this alone without the help of Barbara. But when this happens, Bruce's mind then goes back to a time around like Under the Red Hood, when Bruce had just discovered that this new Red Hood at the time was Jason Todd, and it reminds him of a conversation that he had had with Alfred, to where Alfred told Bruce that they had been aware of Jason's anger issues, and at the end of the day, they let Jason down. Because regardless of Jason's issues, he idolized Bruce. And at the time when Jason was younger, Bruce had took him in and he had literally put him in harm's way, even though the young Jason Todd was just an orphan. But in this conversation at the time, Alfred was telling Bruce like, look how that turned out. We took in this orphan, placed him in the way of danger, which eventually got him killed by the Joker, who's the guy that Bruce kept capturing, who would only eventually get free time after time. And it's because of this that Batman doesn't need to fight the Red Hood, but instead he needs to save him. Because in this case, although it be in a very unintentional way, Bruce is responsible for who Jason Todd has become. But then after this, when we go over to Jason like in present day, and he's out with Tyler, who had told Jason that his father's at work, and is here where Tyler's showing Jason the place where his father does business. And for Jason, like just from what he had seen back at the apartment, in combination to the location to where Tyler's dad quote unquote works, like more or less at this point, Jason's kind of come to the conclusion that this kid's dad's a drug dealer. So when they get there, like Jason takes off his mask and he gives it to Tyler, and he tells him to stay outside where he'll be safe, and also this way so that if Tyler needs help, he can call Oracle or Barbara through the mask and she can come get him. But then also when he puts the mask on Tyler, he asks Tyler like, can you be a superhero for me? And Tyler's like, can I pick my name? Jason then responds like, of course. And so then Tyler asks Jason what's his name, and Jason tells him Red Hood. And right after that, Tyler's like, my name's Blue Hood because I like blue. And when Tyler said that, I was just like, oh, because it is just the cutest thing. And after that, Jason's like, okay, Blue Hood, and he tells him to sit tight, he'll be back with his dad. And from there, Jason goes inside and he quickly finds out that this is a teardrop factory. But also with going inside, he's then picked up by some of the goons, and from that point he just has to go in guns blazing, and with rubber bullets of course, which for the record are still extremely painful. And I mean, I haven't been hit with one, but I've seen what they can do. But with Jason in here just letting off these rubber bullets left and right, but with doing this, he's popping these guys here, there, and everywhere, and he's like, which one of y'all is Andy? And one of the dudes just gives Andy up, like, there you go right there. And when he does, like, all you see is this dude with red hair behind the cage just take off running. And when Jason sees this, he's like, oh, that's that boy daddy right there. And Jason chases this dude down through the building into the alley to where Jason hits Andy with the rubber bullet in the leg, which now gives him the opportunity to at least talk to Andy and tell him why he's here. And immediately Jason picks up Andy's gun, and mainly so Andy doesn't get any bright ideas. But then it's here where Jason tells him, like, I got your son Tyler. He's here with me, his mother's in a coma from the drugs, and Jason tells him that he brought Tyler along so that he wouldn't get taken by the state. But in response, Andy is like, who cares? Which more or less has Jason like, wait, come again? And Andy just goes on to tell him that he can't stand Tyler or his mother, and that he can care less if the mother lives or dies. And he just goes on about how Tyler's too whiny, so then Andy would give him some of his supply to make him happy. But at the end of the day, Andy could care less about what happens to either Tyler or his mother, because the way that he sees it, they're just leeching off of him and his product. But when he goes on to continue, Jason doesn't even listen. He just shoots dude with his own gun. And it's almost as if Jason is taking this out on his own deceased father in a way. But immediately after this happens, Jason realizes what he's done to this kid Tyler by taking his father's life after he had told him that he would bring his father back. And so now real quick, I want to give a shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below to where you can go to patreon.com/Dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Like, cheer, part 1 of 6 has already got me amped, but aside from that, we also got some more Red Hood coming in Gotham, which in that case I believe picks back up with the Future State storyline that we had talked about back in January. But either way, regardless, I'm here for it. But aside from that, let me know you guys' thoughts down in the comments or over on Discord, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.